We are one. We are. We are one. We are. We are one. We are. We are one. And we are love. For we are one. We are, and we are light. We are. You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, then all of the love we feel will save us anyway. Will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again. Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A. I'm Peter Dixon and my very special guest today is Dr. Angela S. Lima. How are you, Angela?
Hi, everybody. Hope you can hear me well.
We can hear you, I think. There's people watching that always are wonderful at saying a bit louder, a bit softer, and helping me there. And we're just checking that the Facebook chats. Well, yes, thank you, Adrian. They are working. Let's see if we've got some comments here just to start the show off. Love lots of engagement with comments and hellos. And this is Kelly Byrne. G'day, afternoon, Peter. And great to have you, Kelly. George here. I love it. Yes, Peter, from Reno again. I like that. Thank you again yesterday. Got another $130 donations towards my trip to California, which is going to be very helpful. People over there are covering my travel and I think accommodation, but there's a few little extras on top of there that we need to have as well. So if anyone would like to support that, just put in the where is it here? Where are we going? They've all disappeared. That is unusual. my codes have all disappeared. But anyway, I'm sure you can find out how to donate. Here we go. You can go to paypal.me/Peter Dixon Music and make a donation, and that will really help with this trip. There are a few little incidentals that I need a few $100s to cover. And it looks like it's going to happen. I keep saying that every day, Angela, but it looks like I will be there on the 16th, 17th, and 18th at Loma Linda. So anyone watching, if you are near that area, come and say hello. And it'd be great to catch up in person. And hopefully I'm going to do a couple of live shows from there, chatting to people that are there, just kind of little brief catch-ups with people. So as I said, my very special guest today is Dr. Angela S. Lima, former Adventist, and today we're going to listen to her story. Where do we begin, Angela?
Well, there's a lot to cover, and I'll do my best to not bore the audience and tell some highlights about the Adventist Church that I think it's rather interesting. I did grow up in the 60s in the Adventist Church in Brazil, which is very different than here. Very conservative. In addition to that, we had in my hometown church, American missionaries who were there, a couple that I'm still friends with today. The pastor, they didn't speak any Portuguese when they got there. He was the president of our conference, and the wife was very active in music. She became our main piano player. She was the choir director and many other things. A lovely couple, 3 children. I'm very good friends with the children to this day. They're back in the United States. They spent 10 years in Brazil. And so our church was big church, was the biggest church in my hometown, Salvador, state of Bahia, north of Brazil. I grew up in the church, was born in the church. My parents were married in the Methodist church. However, they converted to Adventism before I was born, unfortunately. And so I was born already in the Adventist church. So probably baptized around 11 and a half, 12 years old, as much as I remember. And was very active in the church. I was a piano player. I still am a piano player. And I did go to the university to have music training, formal music training. So therefore, it was just natural that I became the main pianist and organist in the church. I also played for the pastor wife. After she left Brazil, they spent 10 years there. When they left Brazil, I was a teenager. I was probably 16 when they left Brazil. And then I took her role when she left, and I became the minister of music And so here I am, 16, 17, playing for all the church services at that point, including funerals and weddings and everything else. And then very involved in, all the music activities in the church. And that was me, which I enjoyed tremendously. There's one part of the church that I miss today is the music. Because, there was a big part. There's a big part of what I did in the church. And so there was one incident that happened while I was a teenager in Brazil in the church that I want to highlight for you guys because I think it's very telling of how conservative and the church is. At some point, one Sabbaths were like all day in the church. Sabbath school, worship service, you go home, have lunch, come back, and rehearse for the choir. And then we had what we call Adventist Youth, which is a program for youth in the afternoon. And it was at 4 p.m. until sunset every Saturday. And so in one particular Sabbath for the Adventist Youth, we were there at the program at the appointed time. And all of a sudden, the church main doors were closed. And armed police officers came into the church. Oh, I would say prior to that, as soon as the doors of the church closed, someone came running into the church and said something to the effect of, I tried to warn you, very loudly, this girl, and showing to be in obvious distress. So when she said that, the church doors closed, the police officers came in, and we were all like, what's going on? And obviously the understanding was that the Sunday law was now in effect, and our church was being now affected. So the police officers marching, they have real uniforms and everything. We are shaking and upset. We don't know what's going on. They go all the way to the front of the church and they look at us and they start pointing at people. You come here. We want to talk to you. And we all thought that we were going to be arrested or something. And now the church doors are closed. We can't leave the church. And so they proceed to question people about, why do you worship on the Sabbath and what are you doing here today? Don't you know that Sunday is the right day of worship, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And so we are mostly teenagers at that point. There's adults in the church too. And we are stumbling in our words, trying to, remember Bible verses and kind of, come up with an answer to their questions. So this went on for a while. And I was talking to my brother the other day, who is also no longer an Adventist, about this particular day, which we will never forget. And my brother pointed out to me, he said, do you know that our friend so-and-so and our friend so-and-so made comments like, oh, I'm not prepared, I'm not ready, Jesus is coming, the Sunday law, I'm not ready. So people were very stressed. And so after the questioning went on for a while, then we kind of started perceiving that this is kind of some kind of theatrical something. That this is not true. And so then pretty soon we kind of recognized that this is not what's actually happening. So the doors of the church opened, and so then the director of the program came up and she said, we are, we did this to show you that time is short, Jesus is coming soon, there will be a Sunday law, there will be a time of trouble, and we just wanted to do a little test with you guys and see how prepared you are.
Yeah.
And how much can you come up with Bible tests and things to really, like, defend your faith, and what are you doing here? Okay. So by then we're kind of relieved in a sense. Oh, well, the Sunday law is not here yet. I had recently read a book called Preparation for the Final Crisis in Portuguese. It was translated. And now I understand that that book was very similar to Now, who was written by Mary Kay McLeod, right?
It's
Now.
it's so funny. I
So
literally had that next to me here, and I
exactly.
don't want to interrupt the flow, but the exact same thing happened to me and my friends at our Sabbath school afternoon program here at Avondale at the Memorial Church. But
Mhm.
it's mind blowing. I thought it was an isolated incident, but to hear that
No,
it's been happening globally, mine was
yes.
in about 78 or 79. I don't know when. Um,
About the
George,
same time. No, no,
so
68-ish,
yeah, so it
right?
must have been
Yeah.
something that was picked up on by other, you know, theatrical types in the church and spread around the world. So back to how you're feeling when you realize George wrote a note there saying fake police.
Yes.
And
No, actually, the police were actually real police
oh,
officers. They were friends of church
oh
members. Yes.
boy,
No,
that
they're
makes it
not
even
fake.
worse.
Yes, they were fake. They were not fake police officers. They were real police officers with guns in full attire. Yes,
That is
they were.
even worse.
They were.
Jennifer has written, I just can't even imagine.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Joey has written, that's seriously messed up and deliberately abusive.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Now you have to look at the context of this. We were at that point in. Well, I grew up in a military dictatorship, so
Yeah.
uh, we were already traumatized because I remember being 10 years old and one day getting dressed up in my little uniform to go to school and walking out of the house and seeing machine guns pointed at me. The government had been taken over by the military, and the military telling me, "Go back home, kid. There's no school for you today." So I go back home, and of course, my dad says, "Yeah, the military took over the government." There was what we call a estado de sítio in Brazil, in which everything closed at 6 p.m. Nobody's out in the streets. I mean, that whole thing. So I was already kind of traumatized by that,
Yeah. So it's already a
uh,
part of the
and
landscape of your life.
correct, correct. And then now, all of a sudden in our own church, this situation happened. And like I said, unforgettable to me, and I'm sure to everybody that was present there. A lot of people very distressed, a lot of youth very upset. And of course, this is all on the context of the investigative judgment. You
Mm,
don't know if you're saved. Are you saved? You're not saved. I have read parts of the Great Controversy by that time. This is things that were preached in the pulpit day in and day out, you know, uh, which I've been in the United States for over 40 years now. I haven't heard one single sermon about the investigative judgment since I've been here. Not a
yeah.
single one. Not a single one.
Interesting.
You know, and no, not a single one. Nothing about the time of trouble. Nothing about you got to hide in. None of that. But I grew up with all of that. That's my
Yeah.
background. So yeah,
Isn't that
very
interesting that uh, I was talking to someone this morning and they were saying the same kind of thing. Yeah, but here in Australia, in our education system, they don't push the investigative judgment. They don't push that kind of sanctuary stuff anymore. And it's true, many of the
yes,
progressive churches don't talk about that. But I said,
correct,
does that just by not speaking about it, does that mean it's now not there? It's really something that
correct.
still is there within Adventism, even if you're in the most progressive church in the world. Somewhere
Yes,
it's
yes,
lurking, ready to pounce.
correct, correct. And so I had read messages to young people when I was probably about 15 or 16 years old. The book had a terrible impact on me, mental
Just
health wise.
which one was that?
Uh, Message to young people.
Yes.
Uh, Message to Young People. That was a terrible book. So I read the book. My dad gave it to me. My dad was an elder in the church, very involved. My mom, the whole family. Anyway, I read the book and I became, in a sense, now that I understand mental health very well, I I got into this very paranoid mode and very uh, isolated mode. I was trying very hard to follow uh, the 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 counsels of the book, and in following that, I became like a very strict Adventist, more even than my own family.
Wow.
And then I started worrying about, salvation, and couldn't sleep at
Yeah.
night, very distressed. And I recall being so anxious about the whole situation that the only person who could calm me down was my dad. So I remember my dad coming home from work like late because he used to work late. He owned a construction, a trucking company that worked for construction, and he would come home late, and I would be up, and he would sit with me and try to calm me down because I was so, you know, distressed and I couldn't sleep. And he would sit and he would calm me down and he would try his best to explain things to me. And but in my 15, 16-year-old mind,
Mm.
this was absolutely the truth. It never occurred to me to question, well, could this woman be wrong? I mean,
Yeah.
could this all be wrong? You see
Yeah.
what I mean? I never did. I didn't question it. I mean, it's in the book. It must be true. We must follow it. And to make things worse, my dad, in spite of being a very strict Adventist and follower of LA, he allowed me to read because I was really a bookworm. I read everything that came in
Mm.
my way. He allowed me to read quite a bit of secular literature, things like Shakespeare and so on.
It's lucky.
And so, which I'm grateful to this day for him
Mm.
to allow me to do that. So, at the time that I was reading Message to Young People, finished reading Message to Young People, I also read a book called The Prophet by Khalil Gibran.
Yeah.
And
I've heard that.
that book is a wonderful book. It's the
Yeah.
opposite of the other book.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but by reading those two books side by side, it made my confusion and my distress even magnified. So
Mm.
so I was really in a real turmoil there for a while, and then slowly I was making my way out of it, and then continue to read books, continue to go to church and all of that. And then came to the United States and found the church here to be quite quite different in many ways. Um, of course, I went to the Midwest. It was Chicago, and so uh, so things start going. I found it very strange when I came here that they're not quoting Ellen White from the pulpit all the time like we did
Mm.
back home. There's not a lot of talk about the time of trouble coming. There's not a lot of talk about the Sunday law. There's not talk about days. And I just go along wondering, why is the church here not concerned about these so important matters?
Mm.
Uh, but now, interestingly, I could read the books in the original language. See, I was reading everything in Portuguese,
Yeah.
but now I'm reading Sister White in English.
Mm.
And then I started to find that the translations were quite faulty.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And now I'm finding quotations by head that were repeated over and over back home. And I'm reading this in English now, and I'm like, that's not quite what she said. This is the original language. This is the translation. And the
Ooh.
translation is really not what what it is, the original.
I've never thought of that
Just
before.
yes, which is
Yeah.
quite interesting. There is a very famous quote by her that says, "We have nothing to fear for the future unless we forget the way the Lord has led us in the past." Well, that quote in Portuguese says, "We have nothing to fear for the future unless we deviate from the way of the Lord," which is
Yeah.
not what she said.
No,
See,
no.
so I'm reading this and I'm like, oh, this is wonderful. Now I can read the original language and there'll be no more mistakes on the translation. I can read her. And so I go along, and then at some point I get to a church in which the pastor, I went to a church in Chicago that had a very conservative pastor, no jewelry, nothing. I mean, he would make these sermons from the pulpit, about, you must not do this, you must not do that. Well, after him came another pastor who took the liberal side of things. It's a very interesting change of pace. And this new guy, he would do sermons like, "Is it okay to lie under the right circumstances?" You see what I mean? Is it okay for an Adventist to be a police officer and kill someone in self-defense? Those are the things he would pose to us on a Saturday morning. And so, and he would defend his point of view clearly, and say, yeah, it's okay to lie. Look at Rahab, she lied. And she's mentioned in the book of Hebrews as one of the heroes of the faith. She lied, bold-faced lied.
Yeah.
So you see, so he would bring up all these very controversial subjects, and half of the church was not happy with him, obviously. So off he goes, and then comes someone else who, to this day, is still my favorite Adventist pastor, but he's no longer a pastor, he's no longer an Adventist. But this guy was brilliant, extremely intelligent.
Mm.
And so now he's the new pastor. And of course, I bonded with him tremendously because, of course, his theology was very, very evangelical centric, very. So he was on that church for quite a bit. And then he moved to another church in Illinois. And I stayed on the old church, but now I started going to the other church because I was kind of following him in a way. And finally, he said to me one day, "Angie, why don't you just, transfer your membership? Obviously, you are following me around." And I said, "Yeah, I think it's time that I do that." So anyway, transfer my membership to the Hinsdale Church, and he was the pastor of the Hinsdale Church now, which you kind of fit together because now I was working for the Adventist system. I was working for the Adventist hospital, was working for an Adventist psychiatrist in his clinic. So kind of everything kind of fit together. So I transferred my membership to Hinsdale Adventist Hospital and church in front of the hospital. Continue with the same pastor. And I remember distinctly one day I received a magazine in the mail that was called Hope International. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this group of people. And I read the magazine. And the magazine was very disturbing because it was, these people are a fringe Adventist group in Illinois, and they call it Hope International. And of course, they say the Adventist church is Babylon and got to get out of it. And we, all this kind of stuff. So I read the magazine. And I'm very disturbed by the magazine. Mail my pastor immediately Sabbath afternoon and say to him, "Are you familiar with Hope International? I read the magazine, blah, blah, blah. And why don't you talk about these things that they pointed out in the magazine?" And his answer to me was, "Listen to me, Ange. Trash the magazine. Forget about the magazine. I am going to lend you a book by Pastor George Knight. And I want you to read the book. And after you read the book, you will understand why I told you to trash the magazine." Like, okay, good. I'm going to your office right now, pick up the book. And the book was I Used to Be Perfect. I don't know if anybody read it,
Yeah.
by George Knight.
Mm.
So I read the book I Used to Be Perfect by Pastor George Knight, and it was like, wow, what is this? So now
How old were you at this time, by the way?
I was probably now in my 30s ish. I was like residency medical school-ish kind of
Yeah.
time. And so I'm like, oh, this guy is fantastic. I mean, he's giving me a new perspective on this perfectionism, kind of thing. And so I want more George Knight. I want more George Knight. So I thanked my pastor. He said, you don't have to give me the book back. You want to just keep the book. And now I'm buying George Knight books and I'm reading. And I read The Pharisee's Guide to Perfect Holiness, one of my favorites. And then I read If I Were the Devil. I read that book 3 times. And then one of his latest books was The Apocalyptic Mission and the Neutery of Adventism. That's a fabulous book by George Knight. And I was reading all these books by Pastor George Knight. And I'm like, this guy is really knows what he's talking about. Of course, he would come to visit our church. And I remember one day spent the whole Sabbath hearing George Knight. He came to our town and I went to see him. And he had a lot to say about Sister White, about her writings, how to interpret her writings. Remember, George Knight left the church at some point, and he was out of the church for quite a bit, and he was mixing philosophy and other kind of things. And eventually, at some point, he came back to the church, and then he started deeply digging into theology and Ellen White. And then he came up with all these books, And so I think he has a couple new ones that I haven't read yet. And he has commentaries too. Commentary on the book of Colossians, commentary on Ephesians. I bought it. I bought them all. And so I read a lot of George Knight. And George Knight is the person who, we should say, enabled me to stay a little longer in the Adventist church. I stayed a little longer because of him.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree with that. Yes. And have done the same thing. Yeah.
Yes.
He's kind of a master and Adventist apologist.
Correct. And he does such a good job at kind of towing the line in a sense that he doesn't totally destroy the doctrine, but he finds ways to make it more palatable, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so I stayed reading his books and staying longer in the church, but then I left Illinois in 2014 and went to North Carolina for a job. In North Carolina, I had a new pastor now, who is still my friend today. And now, when I went to North Carolina, one day I was looking on the internet and I saw a site about former Adventists. So I clicked the site and I see a lot of testimonials about people who had left the church. And I'm reading this and I'm like, oh, how interesting. And then they are quoting books that they have read. And so now I'm very interested in finding out more about, why did you leave the church? I mean, what's going on with this? So now I'm reading a lot of stuff. And now I stumble on Ken Wright and, Adventists renounced. So I read Ken Wright and, okay, all right, what's next? Well, they're Wright's life, Truth let me out. So I'm reading all these books. And then I come up with Walter Ray, and I read White Lie, but I also read Pirates of Privilege.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes. Wonderful book.
Yeah.
And I'm discussing all of this with my pastor, who is now in North Carolina.
Yeah.
And he's in the same mind as me, surprisingly enough.
So he's not saying trash it now. He's saying maybe there's something here.
Exactly. And so one Sabbath he says to me, have you ever heard of Ray Cottrell? I said, no. It's like, check him out. So now he's like, it's giving me incentives to keep going on this journey. So I'm like, I go home and I look up Record Trail, and I'm like, I read in Record Trail, and I'm like, wow, there's more stuff. And so I keep going, and now I'm reading Lying for God, which is a hefty book. I didn't read it all, but I read big portions of it, and I kept going. And at some point, I'm like, that took me 3 whole years of reading, 3 or 4 years of reading,
Yeah.
everything that I could find, and watching like Rats Laughs on YouTube, and all kinds of things, and making sense of things and putting things together. And my pastor in North Carolina saying, keep going, instead of, you're wrong. Never came out of his mouth. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going. And so after I moved to California, at some point I said, this is it. I think I did enough investigation, enough study. I'm convinced now. I don't think this woman was a real prophet. I don't think her writings are agreeing with the Bible. I have enough evidence and enough people behind me now. So one of the last books that I read by an Adventist pastor, Rainer Bursma, who wrote Facing Doubt, Adventists on the Fringe, that book gave me the final push, believe it or not.
Wow. Boy,
Yes,
that's
I
interesting.
read Pastor Bursma's book, and it was a very eye-opening book, and he goes to stuff like, yeah, tithe is not obligatory. This is not obligatory. We have to re-examine the investigative judgment. This is not such. And I'm like, why are you in the church?
I know.
Why are you still in the church? So finally, I read his book, and I'm like, this is it. He gave me the final documentation, so to speak.
Yeah.
So then I wrote a letter to the pastor of the Hinsdale Church. I was still a member there. I never took my membership out to North Carolina. I was still a member of the Hinsdale Church. I was actually an elder in the Hinsdale Church. I was part of the church board at Hinsdale Church. I mean, I was, played the piano at Hinsdale Church.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So I wrote a letter to the pastor that I never met him. And I said, due to these circumstances, I write my name to be dropped from the fellowship of the church. And nothing against you or anybody in the church, just doctrinal, basically. And he wrote me back, and he said, the procedure is we gotta go for the board to vote. And once the board votes, I would let you know. He made no objections. And then finally he wrote me back, and he said, the board has voted. You are no longer a member of the Adventist Church. And that was the end of the communication. And then after that, I still went to church several times here in California, because my mom, who is 90 years old, will be 91 in a couple months, she's still an Adventist. And so because she doesn't drive, or she doesn't drive well anymore, I'm her driver to the church. So I was going to the church for a while with her, and I would sit there and look at Facebook during the sermon and that kind of stuff, and then drive her back home. And I made friends with the pastor, and I would talk to them. Interestingly enough, the pastor, he's not here anymore, he said he was going to do a series on the book of Daniel for the church. And so I met him on the after the service, when he made that announcement. I met him outside of the church, and I said, so Pastor Benji, you're going to do a series of the book of Daniel. How interesting. And I said to him, I'll be looking forward to your addressing Daniel 8:14. And he said to me, oh, I'm not going to address Daniel 8:14. This is not a prophecy seminar. This is just an overview of the book of Daniel. And I said, well, how can you just bypass Daniel 8:14? Because that's exactly what he was going to do, and exactly what he did on the book of Daniel. And so I said, this just seems very incomplete to me. If you're gonna do a series in the book of Daniel, I mean, don't you think the central passage in the book of Daniel in which one of the pillars of our church rests needs to be addressed? And he said, no, I'm not going to go there. So I said, okay, if that's the way you're going to approach the book of Daniel, I'm not going to be here for your Daniel series. All done in a friendly way, of course. And then subsequently to that, one of the church members who is now gone, unfortunately, she turned 90 and there was a big party at her house. And she was good friends with my mom, so I went to the party. And the pastor comes to the party, he's there, and he says to me, now, Angie, can I pick your brain a little bit? I said, sure, why not? And he goes, you mentioned something about the book of Daniel. I said, yeah, Daniel 8:14. And I said, that doesn't refer to anything to do with a sanctuary, a cleansing in heaven, right? And he said, it's not that clear. I said, it is to me. And he said, it's a complicated issue. What do you think about it? I said, what I think about it is that prophecy of Daniel 8:14 did not have anything to do with a heavenly sanctuary. It has to do with the cleansing of the temple in Jerusalem, which was defiled by the Greek king. And if you talk to any Jew, they'll tell you about what the Maccabean Jews did on that occasion. And my best friend is Jewish, so I know a lot about Judaism because my best friend is Jewish. And I've been to her house for Seders, and I have been to the synagogue, and I have been to her house for Hanukkah celebrations, and I was there when her daughter bar mitzvah. So I know a lot about Judaism. So that's what I answered him. And he was like, really like, well, yeah, there is theories and theories, and there is explanations and explanations. And I said, to me, it's very clear. That's the explanation to me. You might differ from me, but I'm kind of thinking that is the explanation. That's what the prophecy refers to. So anyway, and then eventually I said to my mom, I really don't want to go to the Adventist church anymore after this conversation, Interestingly enough, she is also convinced that Ellen was not a prophet after talking to me. Wow. The only thing that still keeps her in the Adventist church is the Sabbath, believe it or not. She does not believe in the sanctuary. She does not believe in investigative judgment. She does not believe in the Sunday law. Yeah. No, she does not believe in the prophet. But she keeps going. And she's like, the Sabbath is the right day. And I had so many conversations with her. And at this point, I'm like, you know what? She's not going to be convinced. She's 91. Let her have her Sabbath. I'm not going to even go there anymore with her. But she said to me, because my dad had all the books from the prophet back home in Brazil. She said to me at some point, next time we go home, I'm going to donate all the books. I don't want the books in the house anymore. Wow. And I said, yeah, good for you, So that's where I am right now. I will visit on occasion, if they have a nice concert or something. I have no issues with any of the members of the church. They are friendly toward me. I keep in touch with my patient from North Carolina, who shall remain unnamed, but he actually went back to school and got a master's in public health because he wants to change careers. And this
was the pastor that you sort of got to know that took over after the conservative pastor. So you've kept in touch with him this whole time. That's fantastic.
I keep in touch with all these people, I keep in touch with them, and they keep in touch with me. And our journeys are kind of similar. And one of the last communications I had with this pastor, who I consider still one of the best. He is the best Adventist pastor I ever had. He is not an Adventist pastor anymore. He said to me, I am now going to a different non-denominational church, is the Church of Christ, I think. And he said, I am getting a lot out of it, and I think I might join that congregation. United Church of Christ, I think. That's the one. And so it has nothing to do with Adventism. Interestingly enough, he cut ties with the church completely. He does not talk to anybody from the church except his best friend, who is still in the church.
Yeah.
He cut ties.
And you're thinking he wouldn't want us to know his name even because it might stimulate some people trying to contact him.
Correct.
Yes.
I had a lot of time. So we communicate, and I know where he's at, but he does not want, to have contact with anybody. And I totally understand. I think if I was an Adventist pastor, as popular as he was, and with so many church members wanting to find out his whereabouts right now, and some of them have actually contacted me, I'm not going to divulge anything.
No, good on you.
No, I can do it. And so I think I would probably do the same thing.
Yeah.
I would probably do the same thing. But regardless, the conversations that I had with some Adventist pastors over the years, some of them had told me the majority of Adventist pastors no longer believe in the investigative judgment, nor a Sunday law, but they will never admit it publicly for reasons of employment and other things. So,
isn't that sad?
They will not preach it, and they will not admit that they don't believe in it anymore, but they will not preach it, and they will just ignore it, so to speak. So in my view, this is a church that underwent a transformation, in a sense that the doctrines that were considered in the 60 fundamental and very urgent for the church are no longer spoken of anymore. So if you go to an Adventist church, at least in California, what you're going to hear is some Old Testament biblical lessons, nothing serious. You're not going to see anything about Daniel. Apocalypse is untouched. There will be nothing about eschatology. There will be nothing about Jesus is coming, be prepared. Nothing like that. And that's one thing that my mom doesn't like about the church here that she goes. She's like, nobody preached about Jesus coming. What happened? I'm like, yeah, it doesn't seem to be an urgent matter anymore or any longer. Interestingly enough, this past Sabbath, I attend the Adventist Today Sabbath seminar every Saturday. Lawrence Seward puts it on Zoom. And interestingly enough, this past Sabbath, he talked exactly about this subject of how soon is soon, and should the Adventist Church still preaching that Jesus is coming soon. That was his subject for this past
the
Sabbath.
Adventist Today one?
Yes,
I watched that as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the church is divided, but the division, in my opinion, is not deep enough to make a split. Not at this time, anyway.
No,
who knows what the future holds? Not at this time. And the way I'm looking at it, the General Conference, which to me is a joke, the General Conference will try their best to keep some semblance of, the original church. I think they hanging by a thread, though. I really do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because no, it's not lasting.
It's interesting when you look at other religious movements, denominations, etc. If there's something about the past, a doctrine they've held in the past that is no longer believed or relevant, it gradually just disappears. But within Adventism, it seems to disappear in some parts, but in
Mhm.
other parts, it is very much still present. And
Yes.
in its core doctrine, it is still present. So at one point, I used to think, oh, it's so good that these ministers aren't,
Mhm.
preaching this from the pulpit anymore. In fact, Gillian Ford just agreed. Des found that in talking to many
Mhm.
ministers in Australia, they no longer believed in the IJ. It was being
No,
preached except by traditional ministers in the
correct.
70s. And I
Correct.
initially was like, oh, this is great. This is good. It means it's going to just slowly disappear. But then with Ted Wilson and what I realized is that it's been strong and healthy all along underneath.
Yes.
Why do you think
Yes.
that is? Like, why is it something that, although not preached in the progressive realms like California, some places
Mhm.
around here,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, that it just is hanging on and quite possibly is making a comeback?
Well, I think it's because, of course, there is a generational change, but I think what allows it to keep it underneath is because we have progressive pastors like Randy Brusma, like George Knight, who write books that go to a extreme questioning those doctrines, but they never cross the line of totally
Mm.
saying this is not true anymore. You see what I mean? They
Yes,
push the envelope
exactly. Yes, good
enough.
point.
They push the envelope enough that the progressives in the church have the illusion that,
Yes,
oh, we are moving somewhere.
false
Look at
hope.
Pastor George Knight. Look at Randy Brusman. Look at some of the other folks. So they push the envelope to a limit, but then they stop and then they leave it alone. You see what
Yes,
I mean?
yes,
So
yeah.
the progressives keep hoping, well, there is movement. There's movement.
Mm.
But if you look at analytically, there isn't really
No,
movement
no, no.
because what they do is they are discrediting some of it or they are questioning,
Yeah.
but they're not giving you the conclusion that this is
Mm.
false. This is
'Cause
false. This is not
I've
true.
yeah, I found some of them to be almost smug about that. That they're like, "Ha, we're being dissidents, we're pushing,"
Exactly.
uh, but the
Exactly.
reality is they lack a certain courage to really
Yes.
push the envelope.
Correct. Correct. And yeah. And as long as they won't do that, they are the ones who could do that. But
Mm,
as long as they won't do that for whatever reason, uh, people like Ted Wilson and the other side, they can keep hammering,
yeah.
the false doctrines, and people from the third world who don't know better will
Mm.
believe.
And are
Will believe.
possibly reading translations, like you said, of Ellen White that aren't accurate as well. Yeah,
Correct. Correct.
because
On top of that,
yeah,
you
don't
have you
Adventists
have
brag that, Ellen White is the
yes.
most translated, author in history?
Yes, yes, she
Yeah.
probably is. But if you look at those translations, at least in Portuguese,
Mm,
you see a lot of things
inaccurate.
that are not accurate.
I
And
wonder I wonder, if this generation that is, doing the kind of George Knight, push the envelope, but not really go the whole way, are they dying out as well? Like, I don't see young progressives growing up. When I was growing up, there were young progressives all around, and there was almost like an underground movement of, we're taking these things from Ford and Knight and Brinsmead, and we're going to infuse them into the church and bring about change. And yet
yes,
we failed. Um, but I can't see any other generation right down to
yes,
kindergarten coming up that's progressive.
No, I agree with you. And they had this meeting in Loma Linda not too long ago, supposedly scholars and theologians, to discuss the prophetess. And I was quite disheartened to see the picture of the group that got together there, because they were mostly the older generation. I didn't see anybody there that was really, and I know personally some young pastors, um, one in particularly who I think is extremely bright, and he was associate pastor from the Hinsdale Church when I was there. And um, he got a PhD from the University of Chicago in theology, and he left our church to be a professor of theology at Andrews University, and that's where he is right now. He is someone that, if he was progressive, he is someone that I could see bringing things to a change. But I don't see that happening with him when I read his blogs about the now former pastor of Andrews University, Dwight Nelson. He retired, and he was pastor for over 25 years at PMC,
Mm.
Pioneer Memorial Church. And this particular pastor, who I think is extremely bright, and so he used to write blogs about the sermon from Dwight Saturday morning. And so Dwight is a very conservative man, and I stopped listening to Dwight a while back because I couldn't agree with him.
Mm.
So the
Plus,
the
he's a
first
bit
the
obviously an apologist
yes,
as well. He's
yes,
in and he
yes,
does all that special speaking.
correct. So then I think, sadly, I agree with you. This generation, there are, you know, very enlightened and doing something like George Knight. Once they're gone, I don't see
No one.
a new generation coming over and
No.
taking over and doing things.
Because
You know,
the conservative independent or traditional independent movements like Arise, Doug Batchelor's Amazing Facts, is it, or whatever, the GC have got a Adventist youth kind of thing going. I forget the name of it. That what
yes,
is replacing is a huge number of young people that are very conservative in doctrine and theology.
yes,
Um,
yes,
and
yes.
yeah, I wonder why I just reread for I think the second or third time the Ostriches and Canaries book by Dr. Gil
Hmm.
Valentine, and it's just a fantastic book. And I love these guys. They write amazing books, and they have incredible Sabbath school conversations that you can join in on Zoom or whatever.
Hmm.
And
Uh-huh.
like the one that you just were talking about, the Adventist Today one. Um,
Yeah.
do they ever? They don't seem to be able to organize themselves in such a way that creates a movement that can affect change. They talk about change coming and don't leave and be the change and hey, come to our
Yes.
Sabbath school and all of this sort of stuff. But why
Yes.
do you think they ever sit there and, because you would have chatted to some of these guys, do they ever sit
Yes.
there and
Yes.
go, hang on a second, when we die, who's going to carry this forward?
I think it's so intellectual, but it's not like, light bearers, I
Yeah,
mean, one project, you
yeah.
know, I mean, those are the people that could carry on the torch, but I don't see them doing it.
So the
I think
interesting thing
they're
with light
more,
bearers is that they are linked with Arise, which are a huge movement here in Australia, and they are hugely
mhm,
traditional and conservative, but they come across as if
there you go.
they're really
Yes,
liberal and open-minded. And then the One
correct.
Project was kind of stifled. They were no longer allowed to be. They were no longer officially recognised by the church, and anything they do now is kind of independent. But often I
Right.
talk to these guys, and they offer this. Oh, it's can't. I remember before Ted Wilson was voted back in, and you would have heard me often saying, "Oh, he'll get back in. He's going to get back in." No, Pete, there's no way he'll get back in. Oh, you don't understand. Over here in
Uh-huh.
California, we control the money and all this sort of stuff. Next minute, he's back in, Like, what is
Mhm.
going on with their mindset? I just don't see any Jan Paulson on the horizon.
No, I don't, and it's very unfortunately. I mean, he was undoubtedly the most open-minded, best president of the GC, and unfortunately, he didn't have the ability to groom someone like him to potentially in the future be the GC president, unlike Ted Wilson, who I heard already groomed some people
Oh, yeah.
that are clones of him
Yeah.
to take over. You
100%.
see, 100%.
Yeah.
So this is going to continue to go. I think the only way to affect a major change would be money wise. The North American division could,
Mm.
potentially, you know, um, stop, the funds to the GC and say,
Yeah.
we are
Yeah.
now keeping it locally until things change.
Yeah. And why don't
But
they do it? Like, what is,
yeah,
there's something about them, and this is something I'm not criticizing. All the people we've mentioned, I love reading their
hmm
books. I love the way they
hmm
think. I think they've
yes,
got really great insights, and I just find them incredibly, even fun to be around. They're just
yes,
so
yes,
insightful, and I just
hmm
love it. They're lovely people.
yes,
But is it
yes,
dawning on them that it's nothing is changing and is very unlikely to change? They seem to have an
right,
incredible sense of hope for the future
right,
for the Adventists. I just don't.
right.
I don't see where they're
Right.
getting that
I
from.
don't. I don't either. And I think the only other possibility would be, hordes of people leaving the church, but that's happening only in North America. In other parts of the world, the church is
Growing.
actually growing. In
Mm,
Brazil, the church has grown so tremendously since I was there, so tremendously, and
yeah,
continues to grow.
yeah, yeah,
And so you have this dichotomy of, people leaving the church here and in Europe, and people come into the church. And remember, Brazil is 95% Catholic,
yeah,
and so and yet you have all this growth in Adventism, and you just think, and when you live there, like I did, you have
mm,
all these Catholics around you, and what does the great controversy tell you about Catholics? You see what I mean? So I had people in my own family, Catholics
yeah,
in my own family, that I grew up with, cousins that I grew up with, and I would go to the Catholic church or to the communion or whatever, and to think that you were still preaching fear of the Catholics, it's unconscionable to me in a country dominated by Catholics. But
yeah,
but they do it. They do it, The Revelation seminars, the great controversy, all of that is still taking place over there. And when I go back home, sadly, that's why I observed. Although I think lifestyle-wise, the church has changed quite a bit, um, and I think it was inevitable that was going to happen, because at some point people were going to say, "Hey, we are not going to put up with this anymore. I'm going to put my unions on, and if you don't like it, too bad."
mm,
That kind of situation. So
mm,
that has changed. That has changed. But
yeah,
that's superficial stuff.
yeah. I spoke to an Adventist leader. I'm trying to think if it was just after lockdown, so I guess maybe 2.5, 3 years ago, and he used to be at the GC level, and he wouldn't come on the program. Um, he did write in the comments that he supported women's ordination. That's how we got the
Uh-huh.
conversation going with him.
Mhm.
And I said, "Oh, come on the show," and he said, "Oh, sure, I'll do that." But then I think he realized in the week leading up to it that by doing so he may actually get some people offside. And I said, "That's all right." So he pulled out. But he said, "Look, I want you to know that I and a few others are organizing um, this progressive Adventist um, kind of movement, and we're networking and we're getting it together and we're talking to each other." And I said, "Oh, okay, well, keep me posted on that." But so far, no updates. um,
Okay.
and I just think it's really sad because I see this gospel Adventism that could have been
Hmm.
just slipping away. And as we
Yes.
were saying before, when these guys are gone and when they retire, they're a bit more honest, but then they're less active. Not because they're unhealthy, but they
Right.
just like, oh well, I've
Right.
done my bit now, and I'm going to enjoy my
Correct.
nice beach house or whatever.
Right.
So they're
Right.
more honest, but they're less active in organizing something. And I just see. I remember when I
Yes.
did quite a few episodes ago, the 1979 Des Ford October 27 forum meeting, and in that 1 hour, like he's talking really fast and passionately, but I
Hmm.
listened to it about 10 times, and there's
Hmm.
something in the way Des Ford presented Adventism there that I thought, wow, that could have been something that if you and I had grown up in that, we probably wouldn't have walked away.
Yes.
And but
Yes.
I sadly see either people leaving and being quiet, or people writing books about it, and you have to read between the lines. I just see it
Right.
fading away, and I think you sense that as well. That there was something potentially really good there, um,
Yes.
that I think sadly is, within 10,
Yeah.
15 years, it's not going to be around anymore.
Yes. I agree with you. I mean, Dr. Brusman is still writing books. Actually, I think he has another book out, which I
Mm,
haven't read yet. But and he is pro women's ordination. I mean,
yeah.
he is pro a lot of things, which he can now say openly because he is retired,
Mm,
like many others who are able to say something. Another pastor that retired that I like, John McClarty. I don't know if you know of him,
no, no.
from the Greenville Church. Fabulous guy. He calls himself the progressive pastor or the liberal pastor. I mean, he did that even when he was still pastor in the church, which
Mm,
is, I think it's called Greenwood. He's retired now. He is going to be coming over at Adventist Today Sabbath Seminar, I think this coming week, actually.
mm,
I read a lot of his blogs because he would preach the sermon and he would blog it afterwards. And I remember one of the blogs that he wrote, and interestingly enough, had a lot of things. It was directed to baby boomers or people of that age group.
mm.
And the way he worded was, paraphrasing Jesus. You heard what was said, but I say to you. You heard what was said, there will be a Sunday law, but I say to you, there will never
Interesting.
be a Sunday law. Yeah. He wrote
Interest
the whole sermon like that.
Wow.
Mhm. And so, very progressive. I used to enjoy a lot reading his blogs, all his sermons, addressed a lot of stuff, um, got very close to saying, this is not true. This stuff needs to be, they usually say this needs to be re-examined, or there is more nuances to this doctrine that we don't understand, or it needs to be reworked
Yeah.
reworked
There's
he
always
says.
something just about to
Mhm.
happen, but for 44 years since Glacier
Correct.
View, we haven't seen it.
Correct.
I
Correct.
George sorry, go ahead, yeah. George Tichy wrote a little bit earlier, "I tried to keep Angela in the church, but it didn't work. She is a rebel." And
Well, yeah.
he and I were chatting to Rainer Barisma on one of his of Rainer's posts, and Rainer was saying that he actually is going to look into coming back onto the show here, and
Oh,
I'm going to ask him some of these questions. And a little
yeah,
earlier,
that'd be fabulous.
David Schramm asked who wrote Faith in Doubt, and Adrian, I'm just putting up for the screen for a resource, answered
Yes.
Rainer Barisma wrote Facing Doubt. Can we just
Facing
chat
doubt.
about that book for a little bit? Because you did say earlier that was quite a profound um,
Yes.
book for you. Not that it was the book that was ground zero, but after ground zero, it was the one that tipped you out.
Yeah.
What
Yes.
were some of the things in
Yeah.
that book that did that? And also,
Well,
why do you think that that Bruisma may stay? Like what? Because I'm not criticizing them, and stay great
right.
and enjoy your little community, but I'm just
Yes.
interested in the psychology of why people will. So we're not analyzing a person or anything, but why do people, when faced with such, like, if you think about it, they don't believe anymore that something
Right.
supernatural happened in 1844, October 22,
Mhm. Yes.
but they're willing to somehow put that aside and stay, even
Yeah.
though by not believing in that anymore, they have to then clarify and confirm in their mind that Ellen White was wrong. She affirmed with
Right.
vision that 1844, October 22 was from God. So that means she was wrong. So then how
Yes.
do you kind of justify? So we'll step back from names, but just with your experience
Correct.
in psychology and psychiatric work and the medical field, what's going on with
Yeah.
people that
You
stay even though it's
know,
not a truth?
I
Does
think
truth matter?
I think that is always that. I mean, facing doubt. He wrote those. I think he directed that book for people like me,
Mm,
because he said Adventists on the fringe. I was on the fringe for quite a while before I stepped out completely. So he addressed that book, I think, for a lot of Adventists who are still going to the church, but they're on the fringe in a sense that they don't believe those things anymore, but they're still there. Um, and he basically dismantled a lot of stuff, like the tithe. He kind of did a lot with the investigative judgment. He came very short of saying there is no sanctuary cleansing in heaven. I mean, a lot of this stuff he went into details and theologically correct, Uh, but in the end of the book, if you read the last chapters of the book, he's kind of saying, but you should stay. Maybe you
mm,
won't pay tithe to the conference, but give it to your local church.
right.
Maybe you don't believe this, but believe that. You see what I mean?
Yes.
That was the sense of the book. I mean, yeah, we are questioning all those things, but at the end of the day, you should just stay because the core is still there, and you're a Christian, and blah blah blah.
Mm,
So
mm,
I do think that for people who are so theologically minded, maybe there is that little tiny seed of doubt
mm.
somewhere that, but what if? What if? You see what I
Yeah.
mean? I think that the deeper you go, the more information you get. Sure, you got convinced, but then there are those times in which you say, "Oh, but she also said that, and she said this, but she also said
I
that."
know.
You see what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. What's
Uh,
with that?
there is there's some nuggets of truth. Remember, mixing truth and error is a device that works a lot of times,
Mm,
because if you mix truth and error, people are going to get confused.
mm,
And when they get confused, they don't know exactly what direction to go. So they want to
mm,
stay in a neutral ground, so to speak. They want to
mm,
stay in the neutral ground because there is truth mixed with falsehood. And then I myself sometimes find thinking, well, yeah, she was a false prophet and she taught a lot of stuff that is not biblical. But look at passage X. Look at what she said in book
mm,
Y. You see what I mean?
mm,
She did
mm,
say some things that were quite helpful to
mm,
people. She did come up with some things that are biblical. It's not all. So
It's
when
not
you
black
get
and
it,
white.
when correct, it's not black and white. So when you get into that paradigm of, you know,
Mm,
yes, but.
yeah.
So I think for some people, you're better off, psychologically speaking, because the cognitive dissonance is so big. And if you can't live with it, then you neutralize yourself. So you go to the neutral ground. So
Mm,
I'm not here nor there. I, I'm neutral, which
yeah.
makes me which makes me go either way, but it's a comfortable position to me because I don't have to be cognitively distressed all the time,
Mm,
because that's what it causes,
yes. Yeah.
you
The
are
cognitive
you are
dissonance.
cognitively dissonant and distressed
Mm,
all the time, and psychologically that is not a good way to live. So then your mind puts some defense mechanisms on it. It's like a person who is traumatized. It's sometimes your mind put mechanisms on it, and George can
mm,
can
mm,
attest to that. And they're defense mechanisms. So some people get amnesic about the event. They can't remember at all. Oh, did that happen to me? I don't remember it.
yeah.
That's your mind kind of protecting you from the emotional
Yeah.
distress. So it
Yeah.
blocked it out. And some people compartmentalize things in their minds. Compartmentalize. So I'll go to that box, but I won't go to that box. So
Mm,
everything is compartmentalized, and I think a lot of people who are very bright, they have the ability to do that.
yeah. Yeah.
So then
To
they
do
can live
it even more
comfortable.
effectively.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they can
Yeah.
live comfortably within that confine of this, position that they created for themselves, which in their mind is probably a very neutral position. It's not like
Yeah.
I'm not,
Yeah.
and so that's how they manage. I personally couldn't manage the cognitive
No.
dissonance because it was very distressing to me, and so I decided, no, this is gotta end. I need to make a break, and I need to step out.
Yeah.
Now, when I go to another church, which I don't go very often, but I pick Calvary Church, Calvary Chapel when I do go, and I know they are conservative in their own ways, and they have their own, things that I don't necessarily agree with. However, every single time that I go to Calvary Chapel, and by the way, Pastor Mark Martin, I know you know of him. He was a former Adventist pastor who is a pastor of Calvary
Mhm.
Chapel in Arizona.
Right.
And I read about the stuff from him too. You should bring him over the program sometime. He is a
Yeah.
very interesting guy. He's
If you could
a
maybe
fabulous guy.
forward a contact info would be good. Yeah.
Yeah, he is very good. So anyway, so when I go to Calvary Chapel, and I listen to them, they have 9 pastors, in particular here in Modesto. They're so big, they have 9 pastors. Usually the senior pastor is the one who conducts the Sunday sermon. Um, it's so Bible centered. It's so New Testament evangelical 100% of the time.
Mm.
So when you sit there and you listen to this, and you listen to a sermon that's pertinent to your salvation, pertinent to your salvation, without all the stuff that's around it. You see what I
Yeah.
mean? And it's Bible centered, and he opens the Bible over there in the pulpit, and you're following on the screen. And it is a totally different experience.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just can't compare, can't
Mm.
compare.
Mm.
So when you experience that, you cannot go back to the Adventist church. There is no way you could go back to the Adventist
Yeah.
church, because you don't get that in the Adventist church,
No.
and then you realize, oh, what I have been missing all this
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
You see, so in your spiritual growth, it's like, oh my goodness, what have I been missing? You know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
night and day, night and day
Night and day.
experience.
Yeah. I'll bring up a couple of comments. Yeah, that was well said. Thanks for those insights. Um, David Schramm, who I interviewed a few weeks ago, is going through this at the moment, and he's comically said, "I'm in a personal investigative judgment of the SDA Church." Andy Mack, who I know is also going through a lot of this stuff, and I think finding some of these interviews helpful from people who've worked through it and gone out the other side. She has said a lot of people say, "I got the gospel from Ellen." I think that's true. I talked to a lot of the progressive, cool, hip pastors, and they say, "Oh, look, I saw Jesus. I came closer to Jesus because of Ellen." Yeah, okay. But I'm not sure if the Adventist gospel that they say they got from Ellen is actually the gospel.
Correct.
Um,
Yes. That's the problem. That's the problem
yeah,
with God.
yeah. So
It's
they
not
might
the
fully
the
feel
true gospel.
excited that they got the gospel from Ellen, but I'm not sure they actually did. George says she plagiarized a lot of good stuff when we were talking earlier about some of the good things she did. And David's
Yes,
got
she did.
an interesting thing I'd like to hear your comment on. Two things he's just said. "This is so helpful for my current journey. Thanks, Dr. Lima." And he's also added, "I feel guilt for wanting to step out." How would you, how would you address or support or advise someone who's feeling guilt for leaving Adventism?
That is, I think the guilt comes from what you have to do is you have to analyze the guilt. Are you feeling guilty because you're leaving your friends? Are you leaving your friends? You kind of betraying your parents who raised you on this religion and they're still believing on this. Are you causing them distress because you are now going to be the lost child? They are going to be stressing over because you stepped outside of the true church, remnant church. You're no longer a remnant.
Mm,
You see what I mean?
mm,
Is that what is making you feel guilty, or are you guilty because you are still having doubts that it could be maybe I'm going the wrong path here, and I'm putting my salvation in danger by doing this. You see, there's different aspects of why you would feel guilty. Uh, my pastor from North Carolina, when I got my membership dropped, and he was talking to me about it. He said, "How do you feel now, Angie?" And I said, "You know, uh, I'm fine. I'm very relieved.
mm,
That I got. Uh, I, I feel totally okay." And a former pastor of mine from Hinsdale, um, he came to visit his daughter here in California, and we had dinner together. He's still in the church. He's still a pastor. And during dinner, his wife, who is a psychologist, uh, so we were talking about my journey, which was leading me outside of the church. And his wife said to me, and she's a psychologist, she said, "Yeah, there is a lot of cognitive dissonance and a lot of problems, psychologically speaking." That's what she was saying. She was
mm,
agreeing with me. And the pastor, his question to me was, "But how are you with Jesus, Angie?" And I said, "Better than ever," which is true, because his question was directed of, you left the church, but what did that do to your relationship now
mm,
that you are no longer on that fold? And my answer was very true. My answer was, yeah, just fine, just actually better, because when I was on the remnant church, we focus so much on scatological events and fears and all of this, and the walk was not what we were focusing on,
mm,
not at all, in my view.
mm,
That
mm.
the relationship in the walk was not what
No,
we
no,
were
no,
focusing on. Now,
no.
we are focusing on the external um, the external factors that could affect the walk, but those factors actually don't affect the walk. But
Mm,
in the Adventist church, they do. You see what I
mm.
mean? Everything in the Adventist church is these external factors that are going to affect the walk. Don't go to the theater because your angel is going to be outside. You see
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
Don't
yeah,
do this, don't do that.
yeah.
Jesus is not going to like you for doing this. Um, Everything is always contingent on your do's and don'ts.
And
Always.
then when a progressive pastor, all dressed up hip and cool to impress the young people and using the latest jargon, has a young person say, "Hey, I've got some fear coming through," for them to then say, "Hey, look,
Mm-hmm.
I got a lot of love from going to Ellen White. Jesus, I saw a lot of Jesus in Ellen White." Kind of then invalidates what the person's saying. They're saying, "I feel fear." A genuine
Correct.
person with pastoral care desires to
Correct.
offer pastoral care would approach that differently.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. And that's because that's one of the reasons why when I told you guys that I read that magazine for Hope International, whatever the
yeah,
name of these people are, and I emailed my pastor, and he immediately uh, zeroed in the fact that I was in distress because of what I read
yeah,
in the magazine. And his answer was very reassuring to me when he said, "Trash the magazine immediately, come to my office, I'll give you a book, you read the book, and you're going to be fine." You see what I
yeah.
mean? That's precisely what I needed. He didn't say, "Tell me what is in the magazine, analyze the magazine, go
No,
back, read Ellen White." None of that. He didn't say any of
he
that.
met your needs
What he
for where you
said,
were at the time.
yeah, exactly. That's why he was my favorite Adventist pastor, a fabulous pastor, a fabulous person. And his journey also took him out of the church, just like it took me out of the church.
Mm,
But I think that that is the kind of pastor that you need instead of someone. And my dad, to his credit, he's no longer with us. My dad, to his credit, he knew a lot about Ellen White, probably more than most.
mm,
But when I had distress and emotional upheaval, that's not what he came to comfort me with. It was
mm.
not read more or let's
No,
understand
no.
more.
Yeah,
None of
yeah,
that. None of that. It was more like, well, let's look at the Bible. Well, let's look at this. You see what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
That was the approach. That was the approach. So
And I'm reading a couple of comments where people are saying, "Hey, that's not the Adventism I've experienced," and that's not the point of what we're talking about. My point isn't this is wrong or this is right. My point is,
correct.
if you have already determined that it is wrong and Eleanor is false, then why are you continuing on being a member? So I'm not saying if
Right.
you've determined that Ellen White's fine and she works for you, great, go and enjoy.
Yeah,
But if you've
correct.
determined
Correct.
that she's a false prophet, I'm trying to work out, why do you stay in that
Right.
cognitive realm? And another answer I'd say
Mm.
to I think it was sort of check. Yeah, David said about he feels guilt. Uh, I felt guilt when I was in the Adventist church for continuing to be a part of this kind of brand that offers false hope.
Mhm.
I was one of the
Mhm.
progressive Adventists that kept getting up and singing every week and saying, "Look, put aside these differences and focus on Jesus." And but I just couldn't
Uh-huh.
get the thorn out of my side, the the guilty feeling when I realized it
Right.
wasn't going to change, but I kept on,
Correct. Correct.
preaching. So I
Yes.
felt more guilt
Yes.
within the church than
Yes.
outside of the church.
Yes.
I just want to,
That is a lot of times true. Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah. And again, for those who don't feel guilty and you've discerned that this is fine for you, that's not, you're missing the nuanced conversation here.
Right. Right.
Michael C, who I think the C stands for cognitive dissonance, says, "Peter, you sound like a yes man. Face purple, crying, face purple, crying." I'm not sure if he's referring to the color I've got up the lighting. If
Oh,
there's,
oh,
if
yeah.
there's, or it might be my high blood pressure. I don't know what that is, Michael C. There's another comment that I just wanted. Yeah, this is Emmanuel, Champion of Jesus, has written. Desford preached seducing doctrines of devils. I just want to advise you there, Emmanuel. You're actually breaking the 9th commandment there. You are accusing, bearing false witness to Des Ford, who obviously you have not researched his claims or teachings. You're saying that he preached seductive doctrines of the devil. So I just want, I know, Emmanuel, that you want to be ready for heaven, a commandment keeping believer in the spirit of prophecy. You've just broken a commandment. So you may want to be praying about that tonight and asking forgiveness. So just be really careful with that there, Emmanuel.
Yes. Thank you for saying that, Peter. Yes.
Let's another. Pastor Ball could use the services of Dr. Lima. Have you watched much of that kind of
Yes.
independent ministry? Like I view them as people. They're people who've seen a vacuum in the Adventist church and they can make some money. And these
Yes.
guys are just preaching what they know that the Adventists want to
Yes.
hear. The leadership's not coming in doing anything
Right.
about it. They're trying
Right.
to please both sides, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and
So,
and they're just raking it in. I won't mention names, but an independent preacher from America who's got a very big independent ministry over there and around the world came and spoke at our local conservative church, about 900 people there, and within his afternoon preaching and singing, they raised over the next few weeks 3.5 million Australian dollars, which would have to be close to 5 million
wow.
US, and built an independent studio in our area. So that's the kind of
Yeah.
power these guys have, and the leaders of the church, the
Yes.
SPD must be going, "Whoa, we could have used 3.5 million." What's going on
Right.
there as well? Like,
Give 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 us half of that.
yeah, give it to SDAQ&A. I'll set up a
Exactly.
better studio.
Exactly. You said a better studio. Incidentally, the pastor that I had in North Carolina, Doug Batchelor, was it Doug Batchelor? I think it was Doug Batchelor, one of those, or the Born guy, was invited to talk at a church in Florida. And I had a friend who was um, had gone to the seminary and was in Florida at the time. Anyway, I kind of think it was Doug Batchelor, maybe it was Stephen Poore, one of those two.
Mm.
And it was invited to go to this church in Florida, and the conference president said no way, no how, and told the church to disinvite the guest,
Wow.
disinvite the guest. And so the church
Wow.
disinvited the guest, and there was a big uproar about the whole thing. And I remember talking to my friend Colin, who was in Florida. He's still in Florida. And he said to me, I'm so proud of my conference president for standing his ground and not letting this guy come here. Well, he rescheduled his meeting to Michigan, of course, very conservative conference. And then he ended up coming to, and then Doug Batchelor came down to North Carolina for some kind of seminar. And my pastor was kind of required by the conference to go to this seminar. And it was on a Saturday morning, and so I was at church, and I was actually texting him, and he was answering, and I said, "So did Uncle Dougie come in yet?" And he said, "No, I'm sitting here waiting for him to show up, and come and teach the spirit that he usually does. I'm so uncomfortable in this position right now, but I have no other option. I have to be here." I mean,
Wow.
we're texting,
Yeah.
while he's at the meeting, But the Michigan conference it's so conservative that at some point they actually pulled George Knight's books out of the shelf. They
Wow.
did. From the ABC, yeah, they didn't allow his books to be sold. I
What
don't know
conference was
if
that again?
Michigan,
In
where
Michigan.
Andrews is,
Right.
Michigan.
Oh,
And
right. Yeah.
so So they put his books out. And then I don't know if they are selling them again at the Adventist Book Center there, but the conference decided that George Knight was a no for selling in their bookstore. So I
Wow.
said for that reason alone, I would never visit an ABC in Michigan. Well, I won't visit any ABCs anymore, because I
Yeah.
used to like to go to the ABC and spend
Yeah.
hours there, just
Yeah. Browsing.
picking at different books,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
browsing at different books, and so yeah, so that happened, and so I agree with you. These independent ministries are so. I think a lot of them do realize that they're not preaching truth, but
Yeah.
they keep going anyway because they have followers everywhere. And yeah, I mean, I have Adventist friends who, if they don't go to church Saturday morning, they are listening to Doug Marshall, 3ABN,
That's right. Yeah.
whatever. That's
Yeah.
what they do,
Yeah.
And the general conference, I mean, unofficially,
Mm.
is protecting them.
Yeah.
So
And I don't think people realize even that when they donate money to these independent ministries, they're not donating to the Adventist church. They're donating to
correct,
independent businesses. And
correct,
I
correct.
wonder if they even realize
Corporations,
that. Yeah.
yeah, they
Um,
donate to corporations.
that's right. Stephen Beagles wrote, "He who has the gold makes the rules."
Yes,
That's
yes,
very
money
true.
talks, as they say.
Money
Money
talks.
talks, money talks, and then if you got it, But I
Yeah.
think it's interesting that two very influential people in the Adventist Church today are former Jews, namely Doug Batchelor and Cliff Goldstein, who is the
Mm.
editor-in-chief of the Sabbath School Lesson, has been for many, many years. They were Jews and atheists before
Mm.
they became Adventists. And they actually met in school and
Mm.
became friends, which are the friends to this day.
Mm.
Wealth families, both of them, and I find it very interesting, actually fascinating, that they were atheistic Jews, but yet the Adventist Church had enough pull to 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 convince them to leave atheist Judaism as a cultural
Mm.
part of their lives, and become Adventists. And I
Mm.
heard Doug Batchelor talk about that, actually.
Mm.
Um, and as for Cliff Goldstein, I went to one meeting here in Modesto, in the city next to Modesto. It was one of these convocations, that they do, camp, not exactly a camp meeting, but he was the preacher that day. He was the speaker that day. And I sat on the auditorium and said to myself, here we go again. Cliff Goldstein is going to be preaching the 11 o'clock service.
Mm.
And I have to say, I was very pleasantly surprised.
Mm.
He preached a sermon on grace. And it was a fabulous sermon. And I never
Mm.
expected to hear that from Cliff Goldstein. Never in a
Mm.
million years. And so he preached the sermon on
Yeah.
grace, and he talked about Jesus on the cross and the thief on the cross with Jesus, and grace being enough at that point to save him without anything else.
What?
It was mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
And he kept the sermon on that vein to the very end, because I'm like, okay, at some point he's going to deviate.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
is going to say something about the law. He's going to deviate. And I was so surprised. And at the end of this, I'm like, am I dreaming, or that
Yeah.
was really Cliff Goldstein preaching that sermon? So to me, it's like And I find it interesting that he was at the Adventist Sabbath and this past Sabbath, and he
Mm.
made an interesting comment. He said something about, look, because the next Sabbath school lesson is going to be on the Great Controversy, okay? And so Lawrence Sideward contacted him and said, how are you going to treat the Great Controversy in the next quarter lesson?
Yeah.
And I don't know what kind of answer he gave, but I found it interesting that he was at the seminar this Sabbath, and Lauren purposely addressed him on the chat and on the questions, and he said something like, "Look, I'm not where you guys are at right now, but I am making progress." Something to that matter, you know.
Wow.
And I thought it was so interesting that he said that,
Wow.
because to come from him, he said, he clearly said, I'm not where you at right now, meaning for my Adventists and whatnot,
Mm,
and
mm, mm,
progressive. However, I am seeing things, you know
wow.
and and that kind of resonated with the sermon that I heard from him.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know what, I am very interested to see what that lesson is going to be like. Every quarterly, my mom gets a lesson from me and I throw it in the trash. I'm like, no, I'm not going to read a lesson. But next quarter, I'm interested enough to see how on earth they're going to approach the great controversy at this day and time. Because
Mm,
obviously, there is so much on the open right now about all the errors of that book and all the errors of the idea of a great
mm,
controversy. There's so
mm.
much out there right now, and I doubt that they're gonna stick for the original script. I doubt
No,
they
no.
can't. And I'm interested to see how they're gonna, what is their approach, which is gonna be a new approach to the great controversy. I'm very interested to see
Yeah.
what is gonna come out of that. You know.
'Cause I'm trying to pinpoint in my brain. I watched some things by Clifford Goldstein sometime in the last few months, and I was going to do a reaction video to it because it was so not what you're saying. It was a different
hmm
kind of apologetics, but I
hmm
can't remember what it was. Do you know what his previous kind of focus was? Now that he's seems to be more coming in alignment with the gospel Adventist kind of viewpoint.
It seems to be. I mean, he was always like, Doug Bachelor law and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
testimonies kind of guy. It seems to me that he is at least considering a little bit of flexibility
yeah,
at this point. That's what it seems to
yeah.
me.
Seems to be. Yeah, I wonder
You
if
know.
that's a good sign or if that's just another loop we're entering. Where in my teenage years, these
Mhm.
pastors would be saying almost the identical thing. Hey, look, we're coming in line with the gospel. We're finding some new things out, and I can see things changing. But 40 years later, it'd be very interesting to chat to him in like a year's time and see how
Yes,
much progress this has come. Or like we were talking earlier, is it an envelope that he's not going to push beyond a certain?
correct,
Yeah.
precisely. So I'm gonna be loosely following this situation because I
Yeah.
think it is a very interesting situation. Uh, but like I said, I resonate with you when you say once this generation that has pushed the envelope to a certain extent are gone, I see a bleakness coming
Yeah. Yeah.
coming over. Because we're going to have their books. Sure, we're going to have their books. They're never going to go away. But is there someone going to come up, pick up those books, and keep going
Yeah.
on the subject? You
Yeah.
see what I mean?
It
Are
doesn't
they in
seem to
fact going to
be.
do that? Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, are they
Like
going
I
to do
at
that?
one point, I thought the One Project and all those pastors were, catching the
hmm
baton from the previous runners, but, you hardly hear anything from them now, and they're not supported officially by the
hmm
church
Yeah.
anymore. One of the
Yeah.
pastors, what's his
Yeah.
name, Tim Gillespie or something? He's running some big new fancy Adventist church that's supposed to be all about righteousness by faith and stuff. But
Oh, really?
yeah,
Oh.
I don't know if it's an independent ministry or if he's sanctioned by the church. Those watching, please let us know. I think it's Tim Gillespie. I think he's running a church, and whenever I query the trajectory of Adventist gospel Adventist kind of pathway, people always go, "Oh, no, it is there. Go and look at Tim's church, or go and look at this." But they're almost the exceptions that that prove the.
I never kept up with them very closely. I know Jafé de Oliveira is one of the One Project pastors. His last church was in Colorado. I kind of think he's involved with Adventist Health Systems right now as a
Right.
formal employment. He had just lost his wife last year to cancer, which is very
That's
sad.
right.
She was
Yes.
only 51.
Yes. Yeah. Very sad. And I interviewed her in season.
Beck de Oliveira.
Yes, I
Oh,
interviewed
you
her in
did?
season
Yeah.
1, I think it was, way back, 4 or 5 years ago, and I interviewed also her husband in season 2, and lovely
Jafé.
people. Again, these are not criticisms
Yes.
of these beautiful people.
Yes.
The exception to the rule, though, I think, is being witnessed here. George has said it's Crosswalk Church. So
okay.
we'll check that out. I'd love to have someone like Tim on the program.
Yes. It would be very interesting
And
to
I'd be
see.
interested to know, those watching, if they can Google Crosswalk Church and find out, is that an Adventist recognized church, or is it an independent ministry that he's started up?
Or if it is an independent ministry, that would be fantastic, because then that would prove that, they can get some people out to, start something different. You see what I mean?
Yeah, that's right. It's kind of what we're hoping for, is that people that in Adventism have a place to go that isn't going to be filled with potholes.
Correct. Like treasures to your trajectory. Absolutely.
Steve Gillespie, Stephen Beagle says Adventism still has a pulse.
Has a pulse.
And again, what we're saying is that it's not, if you believe in Adventism and it's working for you, that we're not criticizing that. We're saying that if you've discovered for yourself that it's not working, there's something wrong with it, Ellen White's not actually a prophet or a messenger, nothing happened in 1844, all those kind of things. If you've come to those conclusions, our ponderings today that have meandered through this wonderful conversation have been, why do you do that? And I can even just answer that myself. I didn't leave till I was 54.
Yes, and I didn't leave until I was, I think that it requires a lot of searching, like I did, incessant searching, it requires reading a lot, and I spend hours, countless hours reading all these books, I mean, Life for God, that book in itself, if you get through the whole book, which I didn't, I read big portions of the book, but if you read Lying for God, and after you read Lying for God, and Larry Dean and those guys, and you still believe the Adventist Church, I'm sorry, I don't think it's for me. I don't think after you read that book, you're
And that's a
gonna
Dale Ratzlaff book, isn't it? He wrote that, didn't he?
No,
I think.
no.
Printed by.
It's printed. It's a group of people. It's not one author.
Oh, right. I don't know if I have read that. I thought I had.
It is. It is a bunch of people. Larry Dean is one of the main people, but there is people who contribute to that book. A lot of people who contribute to that book.
I'm wondering if I have even read that. I know I've got it lying around here somewhere, but I might have got it confused with Truth Led Me Out. Yeah.
A heavy duty book. It is so well written, and goes into so much details of theological points, that fine-tuned theological points, that when you read that, and they go to the Greek, they go, I mean, the Hebrew, I mean, it's all there,
Mm.
chapter after chapter. And if you read
Oh,
that,
yeah. Yeah. I remember why I'm confused,
yes,
because that's a
yes,
Kerry Wynn project, and it's
correct,
also a Facebook, I mean, a website.
exactly,
That's right.
exactly.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yes. No, I have read that.
yeah,
Um,
yes,
yes, amazing. Yeah, yeah. In fact, I think it's pretty easy to find if people wanted to search
mhm,
that. Just
yes,
type in "lying for God,"
yes,
and the subtitle is "What Adventists Knew and
right, correct.
when they knew." Yeah, and it's Kerry Wynn, William Homan, Robert Sanders, and a bunch, like I say, a bunch of others.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
if you and I've got an idea that he was telling me the other day that his website was hacked. So hopefully that's
Yeah,
been
really?
resolved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I think E.J. Lauriston contribute to that book at some point.
Yes, that's yeah,
I think he
yeah,
did. So it's different authors. It's a
yes,
contribution of a lot of people, and
yeah.
they're all good people. They're all very knowledgeable people. And I remember Larry Dean saying something about if you are uh, uncircumcised and you are keeping the Sabbath for a Jew, you are breaking the law completely, and you are to be, killed probably.
Interesting. Yeah,
Killed probably.
yeah, yeah.
I mean that's how it goes. That's
Had
how
some
it goes.
harsh laws.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I mean they go into all of that. They did really scholar. It's a real scholarly written
yeah,
work.
yeah.
And then so I really appreciated that, as I appreciated all the books that I went through, some in
Mm,
more detail, some in more details than other. But I think fundamentally that's one book that if you're really trying to search for truth about the Adventist church, that's one must. If you don't read the whole book, at
yeah,
least sections of the book
of
you,
it.
you should
Mm,
be acquainted with. uh, Ken Wright's book, definitely a must.
mm.
Ratzlaff, Truth Let Me Out, definitely a must. Those books are the ones who are going to guide you to completely convince yourself that
You know what would be fun is what, say you and I come back and do an interview in a month's time, and we just get together all the books that we were influenced by, and we'll hold them up and just chat about each one briefly.
all the
Because
books.
yeah, because a lot of people say to me, "Oh, what was that book you mentioned again?" And so having an episode where we just talk about the books
Yeah,
that were
the books are
inspiring
yeah the books are
and channels and
are
whatnot. Yeah.
very very important. And
Mm,
I was already kind of reading on that direction, because if you read George Knight, like I read some of them 2 3 times, um, specifically if you read If I Were the Devil, that's a great book
mm,
by George Knight. If I Were the Devil, yeah. When I read that book, I was already questioning a lot of stuff. I was questioning stuff. Since I started reading his books, I was already questioning stuff. And of course, Reindeer's book was the last one of that
mm,
those
mm.
books that I read, Facing Doubt. And so, uh, if you are wanting to start an investigation, start with George Knight, start with Reindeer
Yeah,
Busma.
yeah.
They are still in the Adventist
That's
church.
right. So you don't have to feel guilty reading them.
No, they're still in the Adventist
Yeah,
church, and they're still believing a lot of stuff. But they'll
yeah.
point out to you uh, the discrepancies that they see,
Mm,
and the things that they don't agree with,
mm,
and then that makes you wonder, what direction do I go now?
mm, mm.
So yeah, I started with them basically, and when I read uh, The Pharisee's Guide to Perfect Holiness, that's a great book. That's a great book. You
I
see what I
can
mean?
see a whole episode here. Hey, can we
Yes,
just have a
that's
5 minute can we have a 5 minute break? A few people are
absolutely
saying, "Where's our 5 minute break?" We're nearly 2 hours in. So we'll have a 5 minute break, and then when we come back, I want to close with you kind of just sharing a bit of a summary of everything we've talked about.
absolutely
So,
absolutely.
Stick around, everyone. I'm having a great chat here with Angela Lima. Really enjoying it. We'll be back in 5 minutes.
See you in a bit.
You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, never be the same. Oh, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again.
And we're back. Sorry about that. I had to race back into the house and
No problem.
sort out a few things there. But here we are back again chatting to my special guest today, Angela Lima. Really enjoyed our conversation today, Angela, and
Thank you,
listening,
Peter.
getting to know you
Thank you for
more.
having me.
We've known each other, I think, since I left the church. I've got a vague memory that on my
Yes.
my leaving post, I wrote,
Yes.
"This is my last Sabbath as a Seventh-day Adventist."
Yes.
And I think you wrote on that, and we became friends.
Yeah. I remember that post very well. I remember that day.
So I've appreciated it, valued our friendship, and today we've gotten to kind of meet virtually over the
Right.
internet for the first time. So there's been some interesting conversations going on the side there. I'm not sure if you can see them at all at your end there.
No.
No, probably good.
You're right.
There's
Yes.
some crazy stuff going on there, as you know, because you've been in the comments yourself. So
Yes.
how do we kind of summarize this conversation, your journey, anything you want to add that you might have missed out? And
Um, I hope that what I said today here and the steps that I took will help someone else. That was the main reason I agreed to do this. Will help someone else who is in the place that I was a few years ago, and you were a few years ago,
Mm, mm,
searching for the truth. And one thing I have to say, it is difficult. It is time consuming. It takes a lot of prayer. It takes a lot of commitment to do something like this. Because it's not like reading one book and you're done and you're
no.
convinced and that's it. No, there is a lot of back and forth. There is a lot of am I are these folks really right? Is there something else that I'm missing? uh, you know yeah, it is not an easy road, let's put it that
Mm,
way. It's not an easy road, and you have to be very consistent on the road. You have to know what you want to do, and what you want to do is find truth. That's the ultimate goal. You want to find truth. And if truth is not in the Adventist church, then you're going to find it somewhere else. And if living the Adventist church is what's going to enable you to really embrace the full gospel and have a relationship with Jesus, then that's what you have to do. But that's a very individual choice.
yeah.
Uh, you see what I mean? Because some people decide, well, yeah, that's what I want. This is not the remnant church, but I can still come here and go there Sabbath and sing praises and worship, and it's not. It's like my mom. She's never gonna leave the Adventist church, even though I told her. I said, you know, Ted Wilson said recently that if you don't believe, you better leave.
What did she say to that?
And she said, "Oh, I dare him to come here and take me out of the Adventist church." I said, well, I'm just reporting to you what came from the general conference.
Yeah, yeah,
He said, if you don't believe, I think he was talking more about people who are employed by the church. I think he said, if you don't believe, go ahead and resign,
yeah,
and leave.
yeah,
But that can be extended to the members too. I mean,
yeah, of
if you don't
course.
believe, I said to her, if you don't believe in the prophet anymore, and she founded this church in a way. I mean, what it, she's like, oh, but the Sabbath, that is the right day, and I gotta be here. Okay, I'm not gonna oppose to that. And so, but I think once you make the decision and you leave, I mean, you are still gonna have connections, to the Adventist church. I
Yeah.
mean, I still I watch your show. I mean, consistently. I attend the Adventist Sabbath seminar. I'll go to an Adventist church anytime if I'm invited. I'm no problem with that. I'm interested at a distance of what is going on in the church, because I have friends and family still in the church.
Mm,
Um, so I am interested in what's happening in the church. I hope for the best for the church. I hope the General Conference elects someone better next time. I mean, I hope all these things for the church. I'm not. The church is not my enemy, but once you make that decision and that commitment to find the true gospel, like I said, it's not an easy road. There'll be doubts. There'll be moments in which you're going to say, am I really going the right direction? Well, yes, but bottom line is, the more you study and the more people that you read about that, got to the same conclusion that you did, the more reaffirmed you are on your convictions,
mm, mm.
because you are saying, you know, Pastor Ratzlaff, he was a pastor for 34 years in the
I know.
Adventist church, you
Yeah,
know, so, and he walked away from it all. And so did Walter Ray, and so did so many others.
yeah,
So once you find people who are solid and scholar and they know what they're talking about, and you believe this is what it is, then, like you said, once you found that there is falsehoods in this doctrine, why would you stay?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's the point. Why would you stay? But
And
that's again an individual choice. You
yeah,
have
and
reasons.
I like talking to you and others who have left, because those watching who may be on the brink of leaving, it gets to kind of normalize it a bit, and you see that you haven't been swallowed up by the earth. David Schramm has just put, "Thank you so much, Dr. Lemmy. You just described my journey. It's hard." One thing I've noticed is that if you have reached that point and you're having all these questions and you're reading about it and you feel like there's things you don't believe anymore, you can't go back. And if
Right.
you don't go forward, you're going to just experience this for the rest of your life, this
Correct.
cognitive dissonance. So
Yes.
for
Yes.
those that are in that state of, hey, I'm thinking of leaving, it doesn't mean much to, and I know there's at least 5 people watching today that are on the fence.
Mhm.
In many ways, you just gotta, you can't go back. Do you want to stay
No.
living in the constant loop of this crazy, guilt, move, stop,
Right.
stay? Um, that's the only option to end that, is
Correct.
to leave. If
Correct.
you're in that part,
Yes.
if you're on that path, I'm not saying leave the church,
Right.
but if you're at that point where you're just about to leave or you have just left,
Right.
you have to have some defined kind of conclusion to that journey, and taking your
Yes.
name off the roll is
Yes.
the best way to do it.
Yes. Because you live intellectually. I mean, before you live
Mm,
physically, you live intellectually. That's what you do. You know. How many Sabbaths I was sitting there. I kind of have left intellectually already, but I was still
mm,
sitting there, and I was still reading. I mean, I was not paying attention much. I was reading stuff, and one Sabbath morning, I was sitting there, not paying attention to anything. I had my Bible Gateway open, and for some reason, I came across um, something. I don't know if it's Romans. I came across the Apostle Paul talking about the free woman and the slave woman, and comparing, Sarah and Haggai. And I'm reading this, sitting on an Adventist church, and I'm like, how come I never read this before? He's clearly saying here there are two covenants. He's clearly saying here that we are the sons of the free woman, not the slave Hagar. He's comparing two things here. And I can see this so clearly right now. And I'm sitting in the Adventist church and I'm reading this and I'm like, wow, I never
wow,
read
yeah.
this before.
The
So
power of the Adventist filter, isn't it? Yeah,
correct, correct,
yeah.
correct. So you have those moments where you see such a clarity in Galatians, and you read Galatians, and you're like, how can they not believe this? How can they
Mm,
not see this?
mm,
The minister of death. There's a reason why he called it the minister of death, and the glory that passes away. And we have a new order, and so we need a new priest. How come all those things are missed? How come
mm,
did I miss all those things? There's a new priesthood, there's a new covenant, there is everything is new. That's because it's a New Testament. It's not the
yeah,
Old Testament. See,
yeah.
you don't
I
see
know.
any of that. You
I
don't see
know.
it.
And the Adventists claim that, 1,850 years or so after Christ's death, where
Mhm.
that teaching was known quite well amongst Christians, whether they were Catholics or smaller
Correct.
groups or Orthodox or whatever, that thrust of the new and the old covenant was
Right.
apparent. And Adventists
Correct.
claim that 1844, they've got this new idea to pass on to the world. And it's like,
Mhm.
I mean, it's the opposite of what that new covenant,
Right.
the New Testament is all about. It's an
Correct.
embracing of the Old Testament. So all their claims for, putting Protestantism back on track, no,
Mhm.
they've actually done the opposite.
They're going backwards, and the Jews are not happy. The Jews are not happy that the Adventist church is trying to imitate them. At least I don't think they are happy about
No.
it. They don't seem to be inclined to embrace the Adventists. And I know that because my best friend, like I said, is Jewish.
Yeah.
and the Jews are not trying to convert anybody. They are the special people, and they want to stay that way. They want to
Yeah,
stay
yeah.
by themselves, being special. They don't want to. They don't want any converts. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
that, that's not what they wanted to do. But I do appreciate my friendship with her, because we have some things still that are still in common. Um, Entire stuff, not an Adventist anymore. I still can't eat some of the stuff. I know, I know, right? But not for religious reasons. Uh, it was very interesting. Many years ago, I met with her, who is Jewish Muslim, and so two separate in a solution from Chicago for
Hang on a second. Sorry, Angela,
medical school. We are
your
professionals
face
now.
is
Went to this restaurant
sorry, just
downtown
one
Chicago.
second. Sorry, we've just lost you
So
for
we
a
have
second
still a
there,
Jewish.
Angela, we have to just stop you there. We've lost you for some reason. I'll just
The waitress came in and said, "I'm going to tell you the specials, blah blah blah," And she mentioned a dish that had pork on it, on the menu, and all three of us almost in unison said, "We don't eat pork."
Hey, Angela, just stop 1 second. We've lost you. It's frozen
Just of the world
and
represented, Christian, a Jew, and a Muslim, and we can agree on something. One thing we can, at least on one thing, we can agree, and that was a dietary thing, which is not significant, but I thought it was interesting that we agreed on something. But
Angela, can you hear me? Because we've just
yeah,
lost you.
I can hear.
So yeah, for some reason we've lost you. I'm just gonna try and fix that this end. Because we just missed that story and it sounded very interesting, but your face is frozen, but the audio's. I might just quickly. Have you still got the link there to join? If I just quickly remove you, can you just rejoin the group again? I think that'll reboot it. Some people are saying they can hear you. Some people are saying they can't. David says the big storm in California. So I'll just remove you and I'll get you to just click that link again.
Okay.
So just having some technical difficulties there. We're about to wrap up our conversation, which I've really enjoyed today with Dr. Angela S. Lima. A very refreshing and interesting conversation about her journey. And we're just going to get her back on in a moment. And let's see if that's better. I think we've got you back properly now. Testing.
Okay.
Oh, good. Yes, it was kind of gurgly and face frozen. And just tell us that story again, where you and your best friend
I
went
had
to dinner.
School that I hadn't seen, and then was visiting. So
No, we've lost you again.
this Muslim, 2 seconds.
Looks like I've lost again. Check 1, 2. For some reason, I'm not sure if you can hear me. It says that your end, the Wi-Fi. There we go. Are you back?
Yeah. Anyway, real quickly,
the screen's frozen. I can hear you.
we met in a restaurant downtown Chicago, and
Yeah, now I've lost you again. Yeah, as David Schramm says, there is a storm. George Tishi says it's Ted Wilson interfering. And Rick says No, sorry. What did Rick say? You went there, George. Okay, let's try again. It looks like there's good signal coming through now. Through the
Okay.
yeah, I think so. Let's try that again. We'll try and get this story out. No. No, gone again. I'll bring you in again, Angela. It's literally booting you out now, but it says here that it's got a full signal this time. So let's try it again. Testing. Seems more stable this time. Let's have that story, Angela.
Okay. So anyhow, the three of us were in a restaurant downtown Chicago, and I thought to myself, here is the representation of the three main religions in the world, or three of the greatest ones: Muslim, Judaism, and Christianism, represented in us. And the waitress came in to tell us the specials for the day, and there was a pork dish in the menu, and all three of us, almost in unison, said, "But we don't eat pork." And I thought to myself, how interesting that here we are, three religions of the world, big ones, and we can agree on one thing. All three of us agreed on one thing. It was a dietary thing, but we still agreed on one thing. That was, we don't eat pork.
That's funny, isn't
None of
it?
us eat pork.
That's your common ground.
That's our common ground tonight, So I thought it was fascinating to see that, we had a Muslim here and a Jewish here, and had a Christian, and we all agreed on
Did
that
you all have a
particular
good laugh
point.
about that as well?
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, yeah, yes. It was quite interesting. So, but anyway, yes. I think, to summarize, yeah, the journey was long in some aspects, and not easy, but quite comforting at the end.
At the end. Did you
At the
go
end.
through a time? I've spoken about a time period where I kind of felt like I lost my identity a bit, and it was a bit hard rebuilding it. Did you have a post-leaving kind of struggle as well?
Yes,
It was
definitely
blended with lots of relief and feeling of liberation,
correct.
and so it wasn't
Correct.
like a dive deep further, but it was like a little
Yes,
blip, a blip.
yes, yes.
How
Definitely,
did you deal
because
with that?
yeah, because there is still things that they're a very big part of me, praying, playing the piano for many years in the church, and music, big part of it that I miss. I play for myself now at home on my beautiful Yamaha piano. But anyway, yeah, that was that was a big loss,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and some of the other things, that I think back at, and that I miss, some of the community things,
Mm,
rehearsing the choir and having friends and potluck and all of those
mm,
things.
mm.
All those things are definitely missed. But you know, hopefully, I haven't decided. I don't think I'll ever join a church. But
No.
I would definitely attend non-denominationals, and I like Calvary Chapel quite a bit. I tried to attend another church here in Modesto called The House, and there was a total disaster. I took my mom there one Sunday, and they had loudspeakers and flickering
Oh,
lights, and everything was black. And when we walked into the sanctuary, they gave us a little cup and a little piece of bread. That was communion. Evidently, they're having communion that day. And we came in with this little cup, and the pastor said, "Now, communion. Everybody drink, everybody eat." And my mom was like, "Say what?" So, uh, and the music was very loud. You
mm.
couldn't hear anybody. You couldn't pray.
Yeah,
Like I
yeah.
said, it was a disaster, and we stuck to the end. But my mom said, "Never again, please."
Yeah, looks like I've lost you again, Angela. We might wrap it up there, but I was hoping to quickly give a plug for that YouTube channel that you
Put up all
mentioned.
the books, all the books, and dig deep on the books, and you'll find the answers. You definitely will.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Angela, for your time today. I've really
Yes,
enjoyed it.
you're so
I
welcome.
wanted to give a quick plug. Tell us a little bit about this YouTube channel that we were chatting about beforehand. And I've had Paraku Posamos watching sometimes in the thread. I've seen his the two green P and P symbol. So you were mentioning that this is in Brazil, a TV channel that
Yes,
he's
I
started.
I don't
Just to
look
give him a
at
bit of a
this.
plug, can you?
Yeah, I don't look at this one as much as I look at TV Caminho Livre, the other one that you put it up with Paulo Cesar.
Oh yes, that one. Oh, I wonder if I can find that one. That was a bit different, wasn't it?
Yes,
That's a good one to check out, though.
yes, definitely.
Yeah, I may have lost that one. What was it called? And we can just tell people to go and check it out.
It's called TV Caminho Livre in Portuguese. And it is all in Portuguese, but he speaks English quite well. And if you have any interest, his topics are very pertinent to former Adventists, in my
Right.
view. He does a very good job teaching.
Actually, I think I have. I'll just quickly bring it up because it is an important one, I think. Just to quickly share.
Yes.
So the one that we had before is a good one to check out, but this one is the one you are actually referring to. That one, is that right?
Yes, that's him.
That's it. Yeah. So that's
Yeah.
the spelling. If you want to check it out,
Yeah.
everybody.
TV Caminho
TV
Livre.
Minho Livre.
TV Caminho Livre. Yes, he's doing a great job in Brazil. He really is. I listen to him all the time.
Well, thank you everyone for watching. My guest today has been Dr. Angela S. Lima, and I've really enjoyed our conversation today.
I did.
Are you far from Loma Linda? When I come over in February, should we catch up?
I don't know. Loma Linda is kind of towards Southern California. I'm in Northern California. I'm the Central Valley, close to San Francisco. You're going to be
Few
closer
hours
to
away.
LA. Yeah.
And I think I fly in on the Thursday, the 15th, and fly out on the 19th, and then have 3 days at the former Adventist Fellowship.
Former Adventist Fellowship
program.
with
So, yeah.
Nick and Colleen, right? Colleen
Yes,
Tinker.
yeah. They aren't the ones that have organised me coming, but I can't wait to meet them because I love their podcast as well.
The
Yeah,
podcast is fabulous.
fabulous.
I agree. 100%. Yes.
And just a quick plug, if people want to scan the QR code and donate a few dollars towards some of the, like I am getting funded for probably 90% of the trip, which will be wonderful, but there's a few $100s that I need to come up with myself. So if anyone would like to make a donation, that would be wonderful. Just help me there. I'm going to be nervous about all the tipping and driving on the wrong side of the road and all that kind of stuff. So I hope I'll make my way through it, no problems.
Yeah, as long as you don't fly
look,
Max
Angela.
9. Yes.
As long as what?
As long as you don't fly a Max 9 airplane, I think you'll be fine.
Oh, okay. I'll make sure I don't.
Make sure you don't get into that plane. I won't. So just pay attention to what airplane you fly. You're gonna be.
I think I'm flying Qantas. Qantas.
They are a superb airline, so they're very good.
And I'll know for sure by next week if that's definitely it's 99% sure in the bag. So I'll let everyone know some more details about that then. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Angela. And we'll come back and do another show where we just bring up the books that have influenced us, and we'll have a great. It'll be like a book club.
Book club, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Peter. Thank you, everybody.
See you, Angela.
Good night. Bye.